All right, my name is Davis Lee Downs, and my date of birth is 20 March of 1945. I'm from where I'm sitting. Uh, I was born in Jefferson County, and but this is an ancestral home, and so this is where I've lived all my life, with the exception of serving time in the military and being in Vietnam, and then at Western Kentucky University when I was down there in school. I was an only child, and my father was born and raised here, and my grandfather and grandmother came here in 1884 and moved from what is now Nelson County over to in the Big Springs area, and they purchased the land from my grandmother's aunt, who was a Kane. Her name was Kane. And this had originally been the Kane Farm, and it was established in 1791, in June the 14th of 1791. This has been in the family for a number of generations. Mm-hmm. It was originally a cooperage. Matthew Kane came here from Surry County, Virginia, and he was a cooper and an Irishman, and he bought this farm to establish a cooperage. And his son Nathan followed him in the trade, and also Nathan, I found out, operated a keelboat and a flatboat on the Mississippi, the Ohio, and the Wabash River. And Nathan took, I think, 2 trips in a flatboat with goods and barrels down to New Orleans. And the interesting part about this area and being on Salt River was that in the when the river was up, the river's right over the hill here where the lake is now formed. And if you were on the Salt River, one of the advantages of being on the Salt River is that you didn't have to negotiate the falls of the Ohio. The Licking, Kentucky, Miami, anything that was northeast of here had to come down and either take the chance of going through some of the chutes on the Ohio, or else portage around, and that was expensive to have people carry things off their flatboats and keelboats around to the lower part of the falls there, and then once again navigate on down the Ohio River. A cooperage, they make barrels. That was what they did. His trade was barrel making, and of course at that time, in the late 1700s, you didn't have tin, or you didn't have any type of container plastic bags or whatever, tin, and so everything came in paint, came in wooden barrels. Today, the whiskey industry still uses. They have coopers, and you'll see there's still the coopers is still alive. The trade over at Bardstown. It later became a tobacco and dairy farm, and when the horse-drawn implements were used here. The barn down here was built in 1885, the one with the flag on it, and that's all we still call it the horse barn, even though we don't have any horses. So, you had asked me about Benjamin Downs, and that is currently what we call the Stevens Farm on Gray's Run. My great-great-grandfather was Benjamin Downs, and he had a farm over on Stevens Lane, which is a few miles south of here. And so that was his son. I think Benjamin, the son, was born in 1811, and so that's the Benjamin Downs over there was his son. Benjamin Downs was a great grandfather, and Nathan Kane, whose pictures in our living room there, they both served in the War of 1812. The Kentuckians had the most to lose from the War of 1812, because if the British could control the Mississippi, then that cut off the ability of Kentuckians to transport their goods to market, which was tobacco and whiskey and some other produce. But so they had the most to lose. The Kentuckians would have really been economically impacted had the British been able to control the Mississippi. Benjamin's son his son would have been my great grandfather, and his name was Philip Robinson Downs, and he met an untimely demise when he was 52 years old. He was transporting whiskey to market in Louisville, and was actually imbibing from the barrels on the way in, and got so inebriated he fell off, and the wagon ran over him, and he was killed. So that's been a little bit of family history that we've always kind of remembered. It's kind of the normal that you get drunk and fall off the wagon, it runs over you. So he fell off the wagon. That's right. To no good end, I might. This area, I don't know if this home was really all that important, but this was a southern area out here, southern sympathizers. And I can tell you a little bit about Quantrill being killed about a mile and a half from here, that was May the 10th of 1865. And they were in here. They had some of the men had relatives here. My Philip Robinson Downs, who I told you was killed by falling off the wagon, he married Rhoda Jane Pence. That was my great grandmother. And Bud and Donnie Pence rode with Quantrill, and their other men had relatives in here, and that's one of the reasons they were in the area. Also, this area had pretty good horses here, and they thought they might replenish horses. But they felt safe here, and of course, Quantrill wound up being killed along with two of his men. The only thing I can think of, McCook brought 15,000 troops down 55 here on his way to Perryville. And when I was about 9 years old, an elderly black gentleman over here by the name of Buzz Ike Jacobs, I was down shooting my BB gun down on where we have land down on Cank Branch, and he was down there, and he got to talking to me, and he was an old man at the time, and he said, Davis Lee, my daddy, when he was 9 years old, came down here, and when the federal troops were camping at this water hole, he said his father polished boots and fetched water for the horses. And so they camped there, and then they went on to Bloomfield, went on to Chaplain Road, and went on up and engaged in the Battle of Perryville. That's about, we had a hanging. I know Tom Watson speaks of a hanging that occurred here. Some young man was out. He was on leave. He was a Union soldier, and there were some Confederate rebels that actually caught him and hanged him right in front of his girlfriend, I think. So we didn't have much. I think there was some skirmishing out at Wilsonville when the Federals were coming out, and there was Gay was the commander of the Confederate cavalry, and they skirmished all the way to Turkey Run Hill, and they forced the Union people back a little ways, but they finally got through all that and were able to go on to Perryville. I think there's 6 Confederate soldiers buried up here at Wakefield they were killed in the skirmish. As far as any other battles, it was just not any major battle that took place here. But this was a southern area, and that's one reason I think that the men of Quantrill had relatives here, and so they felt like they'd come into a safe area. Of course, Bonnie and I've gone to various Civil War battlefields, and I was interested in it early on, and this was found here. And this is the type of bullet that Quantrill was actually shot in the spine with. And this fell out of the wall here when we were having some repair work done. And that could have, my guess was Nathan Kane, they could have gone up there and picked up souvenirs of that battle. And because this is the same type of bullet, and I only found one. And it could have very well been a souvenir. I have. And I've got some out. I've got them out of the lockbox. But I thought I'd show you. This is an 1851 Colt revolver, and it's a 36 caliber pistol, of course. And Quantrill's men carried 6 of these. and that enabled them. This fires 6 rounds, so that enabled them to have 36 rounds, and they practiced running and firing. They didn't fire full loads because it decreased the accuracy when they would shoot the weapon, and so they didn't put a full load in it, and you had to. It didn't require bullets. You had to put balls and powder in there, and then tamp that down. This is the like I said, the 36 caliber Colt Navy, and this is the 1860 Colt Army, and it's a heavier pistol, and this is a 44 caliber. It's got a larger round and a more powerful gun. And then what I think is the more superior of the Civil War weapons. Colts are always more collectible, but this is the Remington 1858 44, and it's still today one of the most powerful handguns in the world. And what I consider it to, the reason I think it's superior to the Colts is it had a top strap. I'll go back over and show you. These don't have a top strap, and over time, the barrel gets a little worn and tends to wobble a little bit. And these stayed really accurate and they're just a more sturdy firearm. So I thought I'd just throw those in. And I bought these years ago, and I thought I might get a few more, but then Ken Burns came out with the Civil War series on PBS, and it just knocked me out of the market. They got too expensive. That kind of finished me as far as collecting Civil War firearms. I've got Matthew Cain Farm down there, and the reason we have a sign down there that says Matthew Cain, Dan and Sue Sutherland got together with Bill Drury when he was a magistrate, and Bill, he said we want to try to get this to be a scenic highway here, and so he said we'd like for you to have a sign about the history of the farm, telling the date. And I said, well, when I retire, I will look it up to get the lineage to make sure that it's accurate and you know that I've got the proper documentation for that. So I waited, I don't know, several years before I was industrious enough to do it. And interestingly enough, I have the deed from 1791 hanging out here on the wall. And my dad told me he tried to trace the chain a title here, and he said they burned the Confederate courthouse, or the Confederates burned the courthouse here in Taylorsville and destroyed all the records. So I never thought much about it, and then it dawned on me one day the Confederates, they burned the courthouse, but I'd found out that they let them take the records out. So the records were still there. So that meant the deed says June the 14th, 1791, and Spencer County didn't become a county until 1824. And I thought, well, there must be a record over in Nelson County because this farm was originally in Nelson County. The deed says State of Virginia, District of Kentucky, Nelson County. So Kentucky wasn't even a state when this farm was created. So I went over to Bardstown to the Sutherland building, and there was an elderly lady down there by the name of Dolores Saltzman, and she said, "What are you looking for?" I said, "A deed from probably 1791 to Matthew Cain on the Salt River, which is now Spencer County." And she said, "Well, let me go back here in this room." She got a key out of her drawer and went back in some corner room and came back and dumped some deeds out on the table, and it must have been 12 or 15 deeds, and looked through them, and sure enough, there's the exact copy of the same deed I have here, but it's lodged in Nelson County. The house did not budge, it didn't move, but it's now in Spencer County, and it was originally in Nelson County, Virginia. One thing that I found in one of the old buildings here is this is a cooperage tool, and this is called a Croix, and this is from around 1800, and this actually cut the groove. This was used to go around the barrel. Once they got the barrel formed, they'd go around the top, and this cut the groove in the staves to actually press the top into, and it's called a Croix. Nathan Kane was friends with James Smiley in Bardstown, and Major James Smiley was on the ramparts of the Battle of New Orleans, and an English colonel by the name of Wilkerson came up and collapsed into his arms, and I think died. He got up on top of the cotton bales. And this is a Wellington halfpenny from 1814. And the American soldiers went out and got souvenirs. They said they could walk across the field on dead soldiers' bodies. The British were laying out there with their red tunics on. And this is a Wellington 1814 halfpenny, and some of Wellington's troops were present at the Battle of New Orleans from the Peninsular War, and this could very well have been the only significance I can find that my grandmother would leave my dad that is because her grandfather, Nathan Kane, probably was given that was given to him by James Smiley, because those guys collected. They went out and riffled through the pockets and all, and that's a matter of supposition. But this is a Wellington 1814 halfpenny, and Wellington's troops were down at the battle. Some of his troops were down at the battle, and it was probably a good luck charm. My dad told me that he was born in 1906, and the original house from 1791 was where our kitchen is back here. And it was a two-story log structure. And he said it was torn down in 1910 because they were freezing to death. The front part had been built onto the back part in 1820. The part we're sitting in right here was built in 1820 onto the log house. And then in 1910, they tore down the log house and constructed the back wing that's now a frame. It's got a frame exterior. And my dad said that he could look out the windows when he was 4 years old by standing on a flour barrel. They had a flour barrel and a sugar barrel in the kitchen. And he said his parents would stand him up on that, and he could look out the windows. And he remembered the windows being like 3 inches thick with heavy iron hinges on them to protect from Indians, because when they came in here in 1791, you still had Shawnee that would come down into this area, and the Shawnee weren't gotten out of this area until about 1795, when Anthony Wayne defended Little Turtle up at the Battle of Fallen Timbers up in Ohio. And then it was a little bit safer for people to live here. But when this house was built, they had to have security, like shutters, heavy shutters. So this house has been built in stages. And then in 1910, they put the 90-foot porch across the front and down the side here. That cellar's probably from prior to 1850. There's a granary coming up the road that's built around 1850. And Bonnie and I've kept these buildings in pretty good shape. People can't, they'll say, what were you thinking? But I remember when I was like 12 years old, 13 years old, and I'd wake up and I'd hear a file going across the hole, sharpening a hole. And I knew my day was going to be out there chopping thistles. And I was sitting on the porch here one time, and my dad was reading the newspaper, and I was like 12 years old, and he tilted the paper down, and he said, I want you to walk down into this tractor with me. We had an Alice Chalmers C tractor sitting down there, and he said, climb up on there, and I did. He said, see if you can push that pedal in right there, which was the clutch pedal. I pushed it in, and from then on, I was mowing pasture. I was an only child, and Bonnie and I got married in 1966, and I guess we'd been married a year and a half or something, and we came home from college and from down at Western. And my dad said, my mother's name was Evelyn, and he said, Evelyn and I would like to move to a condominium or an apartment, and we'd like to give you this farm. And I said, I don't want it. Myrna Lawson said, that sounds like something a young man would say, and because I'd had enough. And then when I was in Vietnam, and from 1970 through 71, and hoped to renew my, a better relationship with my dad. We'd butted heads, how boys are. And I wrote him a letter in Vietnam and told him I loved him and I appreciated all I'd done for him. So when Bonnie and I planned on building a house back here for 5 years. She took home economics down at Western, and we planned on a certain type of house back here in the woods for 5 years. So I'd been home 5 days. My dad didn't like the way that the State Highway Department had not mowed the right-of-way on the other side of the road. We have that land over on the other side of the road, and he didn't like sitting out there on the porch looking at it. And he went over there and turned the tractor over on it, and it was killed. And my mother then says, when we came home from the funeral, she said, well, I can tell you one thing, I'm not living here by myself. And so Bonnie said, if you'll remodel the house, if you'll re-drywall the parts that need it and everything, well, we can live here. So that's what we did with, my mom, and we all lived here together because the house is big enough. And we had one son, and we only had one child, and so we all had room to live here. And now my mother's deceased, and our son lives over in Oldham County, and it's just Bonnie and me, and still taking care of still taking care of farm buildings. I'm 79, Bonnie's 76, and we try to enjoy as many days as we possibly can. My dad was interested in history. When I was a kid, he took me to Chickamauga down in the battlefield down in Tennessee, and that kind of started off. And then I had to do a book report in the 7th grade about some historical aspect about the county, and I chose the Quantrill raid up here, where Terrell came over and attacked Quantrill and his men on the Wakefield farm. So I did a book report on that, and my 7th grade teacher found out that they were going to dedicate one of the historical road markers up here and have a ceremony. And Joe Creason was a writer for the Courier Journal, and he was going to participate. So they asked me to, as a 7th grader, to come up and do a reading about it. And the day they commemorated the sign up there, the historical marker about the Quantrill death, I participated in that. And so I was always, from then on, interested in World War II, the Civil War. And I took American history. I majored in earth science and geography. I had a double major down at Western, but I took 2 American history courses on the side. Bonnie and I have gone around the Civil War battlefields. We've been down to Chalmette battlefield where Andrew Jackson defeated the British. Gone up to the battle of where Fort Ticonderoga. Gone to the Tippecanoe battle, just here in this country, and then gone to Omaha Beach, some of the buildings that weren't bombed in Berlin, and just things of that nature. Stewardship. Make sure that we adhere to stewardship. You see some of it, but we could always do better. Keeping the land clean, kind of taking care of what God gave us. And some people, you'll see times in passing along the highway, some people are better at it than others. But if you notice, we keep the area clean, and we don't have things sitting around much. We try to keep them in the buildings. And I get out here to pick up trash along the highway. People have asked me before the county turned wet, Bloomfield was the nearest place to get alcohol. And people would ask me where I lived, and I'd say 1 beer from Bloomfield, because that's where they threw the first one out. And since the county's gone wet, I'm not picking up as many beer cans along the right of way as I used to. So that's one positive thing, I think it's kind of amusing when the county, when they were talking about a referendum to go wet, there were opponents out here that were talking about all the rapes and the murders and everything bad that was going to happen when that happened. And if I'm not mistaken, Spencer County's duller now than it was before. When it was dry. I mean, it's pretty calm out here. Low crime rate and pretty safe place to live. Bonnie and I love Spencer County, and when I got back from Vietnam, I was 26, and the county judge asked me to serve on planning and zoning, and I served on planning and zoning, and I've served on the Board of Adjustments. I've served on the council and the executive committee of the extension office out here, UK Extension Office, and participated in building the new building. I was on the building committee out there. I'm serving as the chair of the finance committee at the Baptist Church because nobody else would do it, And I told him, I said, I can look around this table and see, most of the people here are smarter than me, but nobody's sticking their hand up. And I've been the treasurer of the fire board down here for a number of years. So I've served the county. Bonnie's on their tourism commission. We give of ourselves for the good of the county because we love it here.